Okay, so I guess the first thing is just what's the definition of clinical decision support? So obviously it's a term that's being used in many different places and means different things. But from our perspective, the definition of iRefer CDS is really a tool that supports clinicians with real-time evidence-based guidelines at the point of care to ensure that patients receive the right test the first time. And really, the whole purpose of iRefer CDS is to improve the appropriateness of imaging requests and to enable the streamlined vetting or triaging of workflows to optimize the use of resources. And how is this actually achieved? So it's really achieved using two parts. One is the actual software itself, and MedCurrent, we're a clinical decision support software company. But the other part is really to use guidelines. And in this case, we've partnered with the Royal College of Radiologists over 5 years ago and have embedded the iRefer guidelines that Dennis and Yash mentioned earlier directly into our solution. So like Yash and Dennis mentioned, iRefer has been created since 1989, so I won't go into the details. But long story short, it's really a robust set of guidelines. They've been around for many years and have really broad coverage that really provides good guideline coverage at an international context. In terms of MedCurrent, in terms of our company, so just a little bit of background. So we're a physician-founded company. So our founder and CEO, Dr. Steve Herman, he's actually a practicing thoracic radiologist in Toronto. He founded the company back in 2015 with the sole purpose on focusing on clinical decision support solutions. Within his organization, he had a lot of inappropriate imaging, specifically thoracic imaging. So as a result of issues he had within his organization, he decided to found the company and help address this on a global level. To date, we have projects throughout the world. So we started initially in the USA, but as of right now, we have projects in the USA, in the UK, obviously, which I'll go into more detail, Canada, Australia, Middle East, and we also had previous projects in Japan. So really, our focus is to have CDS or have learnings from around the world and implement this at a global scale. In terms of our approach, in terms of our technology, so we are first and foremost a cloud-based platform. So we've standardized on Microsoft Azure as a platform to deliver the service. We also do support deployments at hospitals or on premises on local hardware, but we find that moving towards the cloud gives a lot more benefit. And especially now in Poland, I'm not sure if you're aware, but as of last month, there's been a dedicated Microsoft Azure data center that's been provided just outside of Warszawa. And as of about a month ago, we're really in a position now to be able to deploy this in the local market in Poland and keep the data within Poland. And that's really a key, is to make sure that wherever this is deployed, it stays within the local jurisdiction to satisfy privacy and security requirements. Like I mentioned, we obviously integrate with the iRefer guidelines, and really that's our default integration standard or guideline standard. But in addition to that, in other jurisdictions, the solution allows you to incorporate additional guidelines. So for example, in the USA, we partner with Intermountain Healthcare, the American College of Cardiology, National Comprehensive Cancer Network. These are other content or guideline providers. And it's really important to have that flexibility to be able to incorporate that so that you have broad coverage in different jurisdictions. I'll go into more detail during the demonstration, but really we have a good amount of robust customization and localization capabilities. So one thing we found from around the world is that no two hospitals or systems will practice healthcare the exact same way in terms of referrals, in terms of how to use systems. So really the system has to be flexible enough to be able to localize and customize to local best practice. And throughout the different projects, throughout the different learnings, we've really made the system highly configurable so that it can address your specific local workflow. In addition to that, strong focus on interoperability. As I'll show during the demonstration, we integrate directly with the electronic health record systems, and that's really important because clinicians don't want to be accessing separate systems, or they don't want to be navigating or logging into separate systems. It really has to be a really tight integration between your local electronic health record system that they're using and iRefer CDS, and that integration has to be bidirectional. So data flows out of their local system to iRefer CDS, and any data that's captured within iRefer CDS flows back to the local system. To date, we have about 20 integrations that we've built out with various different EMR, EHR partners from around the world, ranging from very small bespoke systems all the way to very large systems like Epic and Cerner and other systems in between. So again, having that interoperability is really critical to have a successful CDS implementation. In addition to that, we want to optimize the user experience. So we've also incorporated some machine learning and smart search technologies within our platform. Trying to minimize the number of clicks that a user has to go through is really key. So if you can present the information predictively or the questions predictively to the end user, it just makes it a much more efficient end user experience. And in addition to having a robust front-end user experience, you also need to have robust back-end capabilities, meaning being able to capture analytics and business intelligence so that you are able to measure the effectiveness of CDS is really important. So, that's something that we really focus on in ensuring that we have a really robust tool to be able to do that in real time. And then also the ability to kind of customize and localize guidelines. So iRefer is a great base of guidelines, but what we found in practice is that there's also the requirement to incorporate some local best practices in addition to iRefer to provide even better, broader coverage. And then finally, the system is architected in a way to go beyond radiology. So obviously radiology is our starting point, but what we found in practice is that organizations want to also have the ability to look at CDS for other clinical domains. So we're actually right now starting a project in the UK around laboratory and pathology ordering through CDS as well. So again, having that kind of broad capability is really important to have a successful CDS product. Just a little bit of background. So today we have about over 4 million diagnostic imaging orders that have gone through our system, over 10,000 clinicians that use our system, deployment in over 200 hospitals throughout the world. And specifically in the UK, we actually are now over 50 trusts in the UK that have actually signed up or are in the process of implementing our solution. So again, really have a lot of learning that we've actually gained through these various projects. Okay, so what are some of the factors that are affecting the need for iRefer CDS specifically in England? So, healthcare system resources are stretched globally. We have rising healthcare costs, we have imaging growth, and limited access to resources. And this is not only in England, obviously, but around the world. So we're all challenged by the same issues. In terms of unnecessary care, so even with rising costs and increased spending, between 10 and 30% of healthcare resources are wasted every year due to unnecessary or ineffective care. So again, a very large number of inefficiency, very ineffective use of resources, and we really need strategies to help address that. There's also a rise or rapid rise in demand for advanced diagnostic imaging, so CTs and MR scans, for example, which are very expensive. So even if we can optimize a little bit of that use of those resources, it could be translated to a huge potential cost savings, but also a reduction in wait times and optimizing referrals. And then finally, rise in resource pressure. So obviously there's a shortage of radiologists, in England and around the world. Radiologists are not only required to report imaging, but also to do vetting or triaging to ensure that they have kind of optimal referrals that they're going through. So even if we can do something using like CDS to help reduce some of this, vetting time or optimizing some of these backlogs, will be a huge step in the right direction in terms of optimizing care. And then kind of finally, and specifically, applicable to this conference, is the rising use of some of these advanced imaging modalities, let's say like CT, is really increasing the use of ionizing radiation on patients. So even if we can optimize how we can provide some of this advanced imaging, we can also potentially optimize in terms of reducing radiation or unnecessary radiation exposure to patients. And in terms of what strategies did England take? So there's a report that was released in 2020, the Sir Mike Richards report, where basically they specifically identified the need to have support provided to clinicians in terms of their clinical decision-making abilities or capabilities using some sort of technology-enabled solution. So they specifically identified as part of their diagnostic transformation strategy back in 2020 the need to provide clinical decision support systems to GPs, to referring clinicians, in order to optimize diagnostics transformation in England. There's also another organization called GIRFT, Getting It Right the First Time, which is an NHS organization And they also specifically identified the need to implement clinical decision support for referrals in terms of optimizing providing patient care. So there's kind of broad support from the government within England that there's a need to actually implement CDS to help optimize healthcare delivery. So they basically allocated about £250 million back in 2021 as part of a national diagnostic transformation strategy. And part of that strategy obviously includes, or part of that funding includes, implementation of CDS throughout the whole country in order to gain some of these benefits or achieve some of these benefits. So they identified a program a few years ago where they basically have a multi-year investment in terms of rolling out iRefer CDS throughout the country. The whole idea is that they want to have broad coverage throughout England so that basically they can achieve economies of scale and broad efficiencies over the entire country. And as of May of this year, like I mentioned earlier, we have 54 trusts or organizations in England that have taken iRefer CDS and are in the various stages of either being already implemented, deployed, or are kind of in the early days of deploying iRefer CDS over the next year. All right, so what are some of the benefits of iRefer CDS? So again, enhancing the clinical decision-making process using iRefer guidelines. So obviously, that's really important to have a good set of guidelines, a really robust set of guidelines that can actually help with that decision-making process. You need to have seamless integration to your existing electronic health record systems. Again, clinicians need to have a very efficient workflow, so we can't expect them to be accessing multiple systems inefficiently, so it really has to be tightly integrated with that workflow. We need to deliver this evidence at the point of care. So as I'm putting in that order, as I'm placing that order as a clinician, it has to be done at that time. If I do this later on in the process, it won't be as efficient or I won't get the full benefit. So it really has to be done at the point of care. Again, it has a single knowledge base that supports quality improvement programs. So especially with junior doctors or new clinicians, providing that evidence-based guidelines directly to that cohort really helps build their knowledge base. In addition to that, minimizing potential exposure or unnecessary exposure to patients, like I mentioned earlier. If we can get, for example, tests change from, let's say, CTs to ultrasounds or other non-ionizing radiation modalities, that'll obviously benefit the patient by reducing that unnecessary radiation exposure. So again, it's something that we're still actively working on. It's not obviously the prime driver at this point, but obviously there's a tremendous benefit in terms of reducing radiation exposure by having more appropriate tests that don't involve ionizing radiation. And then the other parts are obviously improvements to radiologist vetting or triaging. I think right now the statistic is something about 15 to 20% of time spent by a radiologist is on vetting. So by using iRefer CDS, and we can reduce that number, we can help them focus more on clinical delivery rather than some of these administrative tasks. And then finally, the kind of overall cost savings to hospitals and health systems in terms of being able to optimize resources and optimize workflow. All right, so I'll show a quick demonstration if possible. So this is, like I mentioned earlier, it's really important to integrate directly with the order entry system, with the clinician or CPOE or any other kind of electronic medical record system. So in this particular case, I'm going to start by placing a diagnostic imaging order directly within my local electronic medical record system and launching iRefer CDS directly within this context. So I'm going to place an order. Mamy system przetłumaczony, także pokażę egzemplarz po polsku. Także w tym przypadku używam mój system elektroniczny lokalnie i teraz chcę zgłosić po prostu tomografię głowy i zobaczyć, czy to jest odpowiedni test dla tego pacjenta. Także wybieram z mojej listy tomografię i w tym momencie mamy integrację gdzie nasz system iRefer CDS się pokaże automatycznie jako okienko nad systemem. Jak tutaj widzimy, pewne informacje są podane z lokalnego systemu. Także na przykład pacjenta wiek i płeć automatycznie jest podana i używamy tą informację, żeby dalej kontynuować i mieć optymalny proces. Widzimy tak samo po tej lewej stronie mamy inne informacje o pacjencie, które możemy sprowadzić ze systemu tak samo. Na przykład pewne badania laboratyczne, które mogą być korzystne albo możemy używać, żeby na przykład niektóre testy nie pokazać albo mieć kontraindykacje na niektóre testy. Ale z tej prawej strony po prostu tutaj mamy teraz listę przyczyn, które możemy teraz wybrać i lekarz teraz może przejść przez proces i wybrać test, który będzie najodpowiedniejszy w tej sytuacji. Także na przykład mamy teraz listę różnych przyczyn, także na przykład wybierzemy teraz ból głowy. Jak wybierzemy ból głowy, mamy teraz dodatkowe pytania. I te pytania są teraz podane przez iRefer, także teraz wybieramy pytania albo dodatkowe pytania, na przykład teraz wybierzemy typ ból głowy, także wybierę pierwszą opcję i to jest w tej sytuacji to jest podejrzane. Także przez iRefer i przez te pytania, które mam teraz odpowiedź, tomografia nie jest idealnym testem. Zamiast powinniśmy zrobić tomografię głowy i to jest tutaj pokazane zielono. I po prostu teraz możemy zobaczyć, jeżeli chcemy zobaczyć wytyczne iRefer, możemy kliknąć tutaj i widzimy więcej informacji. Ale najważniejsze jest to, że jeżeli wybierzemy ten test i widzimy, że to jest zielone, także to znaczy, że to jest najlepszy test tej sytuacji, jak wybierzemy, to później zapiszemy ten test z powrotem do lokalnego systemu. Także to jest ta właśnie integracja z powrotem do lokalnego systemu i możemy te informacje później napisać z powrotem. To, co żeśmy złapali w naszym systemie iRefer, możemy napisać z powrotem i ta informacja zostaje wtedy w lokalnym systemie. I można później tutaj dodać więcej informacji lokalnie, ale żeśmy wybrali teraz najlepszy test dla pacjenta, jak żeśmy przeszli przez ten proces. OK, możemy wrócić do prezentacji. Okay, so now that we've gone through a demo and you have a general idea of what iRefer CDS is, let's look at the impacts on some of our UK projects. So the first one we'll go into is work that we did with Dr. Dennis Remedios back in 2019 at Northwick Park Hospital, which is in Northwest London. So this was our first iRefer pilot project. And really what we did here is we looked at the emergency department and we looked at two groups, one that was using iRefer CDS and guidelines and the other cohort that was not using guidelines. And what we found is that requests that were going through iRefer CDS were rejected at a rate of about 5% versus requests that were not going through iRefer CDS were rejected about 20% of the time. So you can see there's a significant impact or significant difference in terms of the rejection rate after having applied the use of iRefer CDS directly in clinical practice. And as a result of this, we helped with improving request appropriateness and obviously some of the vetting workflows so that optimize the amount of time that the radiologist has for actually reporting cases and performing clinical work rather than vetting or triaging or kind of following up with clinicians around choosing the most appropriate test. So based on this work that we did with Dr. Remedios and the team at Northwick Park Hospital, we decided to kind of expand further and obviously build on that success and go further into other projects and other hospitals. So recently, this is Princess Alex Hospital, which is north of London. So they went live last November. Again, this is one of the projects that was funded by the UK government last year. And they focus both on primary care, so general practitioners, as well as secondary care or specialists within the hospitals. And what we found with this project is that there was about 8.4% of tests requested by GPs that were withdrawn after going through iRefer CDS, and about 12.6% of clinicians started with one test, but actually had selected a different test after going through the recommendations. So in sum, over 20% change in cancellation rate as a result of using iRefer CDS, which is obviously a very significant impact on their system and on their operations. When we look at secondary care, we noticed there was about a 2.4% cancellation rate and a 7.8% change rate. So about half of what we see with the GPs, which makes sense because obviously specialists in the hospitals have a lot more knowledge in what they're actually ordering. But nonetheless, about 10% change in cancellation rate was seen as a very positive impact. And then, if we kind of look at this data a little bit further, what we did is we also did a financial analysis. Obviously, it's very important to optimize workflow and optimize patient care, but also what are the cost impacts as a result of this? So what we found there was that in a 6-month period, where we analyzed what's called cost avoidance, or basically reallocating costs from one type of test to another. So again, we're not really looking at savings because we're not wanting to eliminate tests, but we just want to reallocate funding, or we want to see how funding changes when we change from one test to another. We found that there's about £150,000 cost avoidance in a 6-month period, or projected annual about £268,000. So very significant impact based on how much money they actually spent on the solution versus how much cost avoidance they're actually able to achieve. So, as a result of this, they're, continuing on obviously to expand the solution. And in fact, we're actually looking at laboratory CDS as well as part of kind of the next phase with them because of the tremendous cost savings that they're able to achieve. So overall, the impacts at Princess Alexandra was about a 25 to 30% reduction in inappropriate requests. They're, moving forward, they're going to be looking at further optimizations. And also, in addition to that, in parallel, we're looking at analysis towards potential reduction in radiation exposure to patients. So that's currently underway right now in terms of doing a follow-up study to actually examine what the potential impacts have been in terms of reducing radiation exposure to patients. Milton Keynes Hospital, it's another hospital that's located north of London. They're focused on secondary care, so exclusively with specialists. So in their case, there's about a 2% cancellation rate and a 6.3% change rate. So again, very similar to what we've seen at Princess Alexandra Hospital in secondary care. But in this case, we did some further analysis as well. And what we found is that they can achieve potentially about a 285-hour per year savings in terms of resource time as a result of the system by implementing a semi-automated vetting workflow, which is a significant impact on the radiologists and being able to actually optimize the use of radiologist time. In addition to that, we also have seen that there's about £150,000 per annum cost avoidance as well as a result of the system. So again, very big financial impact as well as resource impact as a result of the implementation. In addition to looking at individual hospitals, we also have been working with what are called imaging networks in England. So MRAD is one of our imaging networks. So in this case, they have 7 hospitals that are part of the network where we implemented our solution. So that represents over 1,000 general practitioners and other primary care providers. Phase 1, which is right now, we've only focused on X-ray referrals. So they did a kind of staged approach where they're focusing only on certain types of modalities first, and then we'll introduce other modalities over time. So again, we're going to focus on ultrasound, MR, and CT in the next phase, as well as secondary care. So far, these are 3 of the hospitals, and others are coming online. But in their case, and this is only for X-ray, they've seen about a 5% or so change rate and about a 2% cancellation rate. So again, very kind of consistent data that we're seeing in terms of improvements. Hillingdon Hospitals, which is part of the Northwest London region, where Dr. Remedios is from. So they've been live with us for quite a bit of time. So as you can see, about 91,000 orders have been processed. And again, they've been seeing about 3 to 5% change rate and about a 2% cancellation rate. And one thing that happens over time as well is that there's learning, right? So when we initially start, there's obviously going to be a learning curve. People are getting used to the system. But over time, as they use the system, they learn what's most appropriate And we expect to see that percentage go down over time as people become more familiar with best practices. And that's the ultimate goal, is to really use the system to reinforce learning and make sure that the system is optimized over time. And then just finally, Buckinghamshire, another organization, they've seen about a 4% change rate and about a 2% cancellation rate. So very kind of consistent stats that we're seeing amongst some of these hospitals. Obviously, we're in the process right now of kind of optimizing and looking at other ways to even increase this even further. All right, so in terms of kind of summary and next steps. So as you can see from the data, MedCurrent's iRefer CDS CQ projects have demonstrated measurable impacts on imaging appropriateness, and then obviously impacts on the NHS financial efficiencies as well. So with the cost avoidance and other metrics, it's really important to measure those to be able to justify the spend by the government in terms of these projects. And obviously the use of iRefer guidelines has really been critical in order to actually achieve these results. So without having iRefer guidelines embedded directly within the CDS product, we wouldn't have been seeing these efficiencies. So it's really important and critical that you have those guidelines directly embedded at that point of care, at that point of order entry. And like I mentioned earlier, efforts are currently underway to measure the impacts that this has had on radiation exposure to patients. So we've obviously focused initially on the change rate and cancellation rate and the financial impacts. But right now we have a good amount of data where we're now examining what has actually been the impact on the patient from a radiation exposure. And those results we're hoping to kind of publish probably over the next 3 to 4 months. So then what are the next steps in Poland? So I think, from our perspective, it's really important to identify clinical decision support champions. So from the Ministry of Health, clinicians and other hospitals to help drive the adoption of iRefer CDS projects locally, regionally, or throughout the country. We're looking to build on the existing work of the Polish iRefer guideline from the website and assess the feasibility of rolling this out throughout the country, or at least at pilot sites in Poland, in order to validate the benefits. So obviously building on what the RCR has started with the iRefer website, but actually now start the sort of next phase to look at actually iRefer CDS as a way to help further strengthen that change. And then finally, establishing partnerships with leading Polish electronic health record system providers so that we can integrate seamlessly directly into their systems. Like I mentioned earlier, it's really critical to have that tight bidirectional integration in order to help achieve the most benefit or the maximum benefits and optimize the end user workflow. So really that's what we wanted to focus on, and thank you very much for your time today. Dziękuję bardzo.